Okie doke. All right, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday, and as per usual, we'll go ahead and start with the news of the week. And so, what we found here recently, most of the news was dominated with a lot of announcements about companies opening up U.S. domestic manufacturing facilities. And most of this is the result of the Inflation Reduction Act, where they were, putting incentives in place should you produce these things domestically. So the first one I wanted to note was First Solar has announced that they're opening up a research and development facility at their Perrysburg, Ohio plant. Now, First Solar is the only domestically headquartered thin film solar manufacturer. They're certainly the largest solar manufacturer that is in the United States. They focus primarily on utility scale product. And they did recently announce that they're going to be investing about $1.2 billion in expanding their facilities here in the US, bringing it up to about a 10 gigawatt annual capacity. Then Helene Solar announced that they're opening up a 420 megawatt silicon solar plant up in Mountain Iron, Minnesota. Not sure where that is, maybe up on the Iron Range somewhere. It's going to be next door to the 150 megawatt Canadian solar plant. This is going to make it the second largest polysilicon solar plant in the United States. They anticipate it's going to add about 60 employees to their Minnesota workforce, bringing that up to about 100. And just jumping around the country, we've had Ohio, we've had Minnesota, and now we've got Texas. Mission Solar Energy has announced that they're going to be expanding their facility near San Antonio. This is located on an old Air Force base, Brooks Air Force Base. They're going to expand that to about 1 gigawatt of annual capacity. And what the CEO noted when he was making this announcement is that currently solar accounts for about 5% of the domestic electricity production. But in order to reach all of the targets that have been put out there by the government and by the industry, it's going to have to get up to about 40% by the year 2035. So we're going to see a lot of, now domestic manufacturing capacity, because I think people have decided they simply don't trust the supply chain when things are coming from all over the world. And Enphase has announced that they're going to be opening up 6 new US manufacturing plants in 2023. This is specifically designed to take advantage of the 11 cent per kilowatt production, or it's 11 cents per watt, I think it is, of tax credit for microinverters. That's part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And it was brought up during one of the previous meetings asking if there was a US manufacturer of microinverters. So up until recently, Enphase, they're headquartered in California, but most of their microinverters were made in Mexico. So it looks like they're going to go domestic on this. And then the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, came out with a report saying that solar now accounts for about 25% of the electricity on the grid. That's an increase in 2022 of 17.5% over 2021. If we look at the breakdown on this, solar, as I noted earlier, is about 5% of the electric production. Wind is about 10%, hydro about 6.7%, and then the balance is going to be geothermal and biomass. That makes up about 3% of what's on the grid. Then if you see some of the other energy sources that have been out there traditionally, coal and nuclear are really technologies that are in decline, and they're declining pretty rapidly. 5 years ago, coal accounted for about 30.3% of all of the electricity on the grid. Today, it's about 19%. Nuclear, a little less dramatic in its reduction from about 19.6 to about 17.6. Problem is, it's much more difficult to shut down a nuclear power plant. I always think of it as like riding the back of a tiger. once you're on it, yeah, it's hard to get off, because the costs involved of decommissioning a nuclear power plant are oftentimes much more expensive than actually the cost of constructing it. So that's going to continue to be a problem. And plus, you don't know where to put the waste or anything of that nature. Another report that came out this week was a study by IdeaSmith that found that the Texas grid, which has become, very heavily renewable based, that consumers in Texas have saved on average about $925 million per month because renewables are integrated onto the grid. That accounts for about $7.5 billion in 2022 alone in savings to electric consumers in Texas, or a total of $28 billion over the last 12 years. And as this graph shows, the savings are increasing, and they're increasing dramatically. That's what this is indicating, largely because from 2021 to 2022, the cost of natural gas went from $3.64 per million BTU to about $6.25. So really almost double, not quite double, but significant. The price of coal also went up. It went up from $3.26 to about $3.72. So that was the news that I had for this week. Not a lot of legislation or innovations, but a lot of announcements about facilities opening up. So did anybody have anything they wanted to add to that or bring up for the group? Otherwise, I'm always happy to hear myself talk, right? So anyway, well, let me jump in on the subject that I thought we could talk about today. And that is sort of a comparison between the various, the leading battery systems. We're seeing more and more facilities out there that are putting in battery systems at the residential level. And the three top contenders are going to be Tesla, the Tesla PowerWall 2, the SolarEdge, and Enphase. And if we look at the market share here in this diagram, you can see that Enphase is actually going to be the largest of the battery bank systems that are being put in today, Tesla being second. Now, LG Energy, and I always in my own mind combine LG and SolarEdge, because essentially the SolarEdge product is just an what do they call that, OEM or whatever, of LG Chem's battery bank. So those two are combined. And what we're finding is that today, according to the most recent reports, I think it's about, I don't see that very closely, but I think it's about 17% of all of the systems installed in the marketplace are putting in battery bank systems. And some of the reasons why they're putting in these systems, well, they want to be completely off the grid. That's a minority reason, of course. There's also the issue of being a battery backup system in case the grid goes down. There are, in case you have poor net metering laws in place where you're not getting paid very much for what you pump back onto the grid. There they refer to that typically as self-consumption, where you're going to try and use as much of your own power as possible. So you store it in your own battery rather than export it back to the grid. And then of course, a big growing one is time of day or pricing. And we see this out on the West Coast quite a lot, where you have higher cost, for instance, in the early evening for electricity. So you would install a system where you store the power in the middle of the afternoon, then use the power in the evening when that power is more expensive from the grid. And that's something that we're just going to continue to see expand. We may actually also see something in the not too distant future where people are installing batteries simply to participate in virtual power plant functionality. We're seeing in California, I just saw an article about Puerto Rico where they're putting in a virtual power plant. And what the grid is doing is saying, hey, during periods of high demand, high energy demand, we will pay you a significant amount of money per kilowatt hour to export power from your battery system to the grid. I think in California, that amounts to about $2 a kilowatt hour that they will pay for that. So, so we're seeing a lot of that. So what are the, what's the comparison here? Well, the Tesla PowerWall, and you can see the Tesla PowerWall is actually going to be 3 components. There's the battery itself, there's an inverter, because it is an AC coupled system. And then there's a gateway. And essentially these gateways are transfer switches that allow the system to go to direct the power to the critical loads and disconnect from the grid in the case of a power outage, you know, where the grid goes down. So I actually, to prepare for this, looked at quite a number of videos where they were comparing them. So I'll give you their perspectives on it. It came from a number of sources, and I've heard some from installers. But the Tesla PowerWall is an AC coupled system. It has a 13.5 kilowatt hour capacity. So that would be the equivalent of, you know, how much gas can you put in the tank kind of thing. Knowing that a typical home uses about 30 kilowatt hours a day, that should give you a sense that you're getting, you know, about a third of a day, you know, assuming you don't make any changes. It has a 7.6 kilowatt peak capacity. That means you could run that much in any 1 second, but continuous is 5.8 kilowatts. So that's the amount of power that each of these power walls will support. One of the issues with the Tesla Powerwall is it does not have any way of restricting the amount of generation from the array. So what would happen? Let's say you're in a situation where the sun is shining, the grid is down, your battery is full, your loads have been fully met, but you're generating more power than you need. Well, what the system will do is shut down the production. So it'll go offline for about 5 minutes. You know, the inverter will basically shut down. Then it will reboot. If it needs a little bit of power, it will then absorb that power. But once that's maxed out, then the inverter will shut down again. So essentially you're curtailing in tiny microcycles the system, you know, and it tends to wear down the battery a bit because the battery is cycling in very small shifts. It may also wear down the inverter, I suspect, because it's turning it on, turning it off. There's also no ability for generator to charge the battery. You cannot hook a generator up to it. Now you can hook up a generator to run your loads in lieu of this, but you can't hook up a generator to charge the battery. The warranty on these, now this uses a technology, a lithium ion technology similar to what you find in electric vehicles. Obviously it's Tesla, so I'm sure they're using exactly the same thing they put in their cars. But they had warranted this originally for 10 years, 2,800 cycles. But because of these little microcycles and the wearing down of it, there may be a tendency of this thing to cycle much more frequently than might otherwise have been anticipated. And then when some of the competition came out, specifically Enphase, they warranted theirs. They have a different battery technology or chemistry that's more robust. So they said, all right, we're going to use it 10,000 cycles, 10 years. Tesla said, all right, we'll match that. We'll put you 10 years, unlimited cycles, but they didn't change their batteries. So the concern is that these that were anticipated to wear out after, say, 3,000 cycles may still be wearing out after 3,000 cycles. And yeah, they're warranted, but you're going to see a lot of claims against these things as they age, which leads to the last point. And this is something I hear all the time from folks. Tesla has horrible customer service. Trying to get somebody to respond, trying to get these things serviced can be a nightmare. So that's something to bear in mind if you're thinking about going out and installing these systems, is what kind of support are you going to get? Now, the next one, the Enphase IQ, they used to call it the Empower. Now I think they're calling it the Enphase IQ battery system. So this is the best selling, and not because it's inherently great. I think it's just that Enphase is the largest inverter system out there. And so their battery system is the most installed. And what we're seeing is a movement in the industry for essentially proprietary solutions. You know, you have the Tesla system, you get a package with all the components that come from Tesla. You get an Enphase system, all the components come from Enphase. SolarEdge has now rebranded the LG Chem they used to work with. Now I think they're just sticking their label on it, but it's one point of contact on that. Generac is doing the same thing. They're coming out with systems that are, you know, all under one brand. So I think that's going to be a trend that we see continue. So Enphase is, again, an AC coupled system. Kind of obviously, because the microinverters are generating from the panel in AC. So then you need to have another inverter to take that and convert it to DC to charge the battery, and then invert it to AC again to use on the load. So that is the downside, a little less efficiency with these AC coupled systems. So both the Tesla and the SolarEdge are AC coupled systems. It has a smaller capacity with the 3 battery unit. It's 10 kilowatt hours. They do sell them in smaller. They've got little 3 kilowatt hour units. The 10 is just 3 of those combined. So it's 3 point whatever, 3 1/3. It has a surge capacity of 5.7 kilowatts, a continuous capacity of 3.8. So it's less. It's less of a load thing. So if you've got big loads that have to run, this may be a problem for you. You might have to install multiple units, which can get pretty pricey. The inverters, however, do speak to each other. So when you buy this little unit, inside that battery bank are, I think, like 12, maybe 16 microinverters, and they are communicating back to the microinverters that are already installed. And so there is no curtailment. What they're doing is, if they don't need the power, they're communicating to the microinverters up there on the panels and saying, okay, don't send us more power than we need. So it's not like a turn on, turn off kind of thing. It's more like, let's throttle it down a little bit, you know, and only use what we need. Now, this is only when you're in standalone mode, when the grid is down. You know, obviously when the grid is up, you're going to generate to capacity and then, you know, net meter back all of the power to the grid. There is the ability to incorporate a generator and use that generator for charging of your batteries. That's a good thing. The chemistry of these batteries is a little more robust. It's not the same chemistry as what is in electric vehicles. So it's 10,000 cycles, 10 years. It does have what they refer to as like sunshine backup or whatever. We've talked about this in previous, where the Enphase 8s, IQ8s will allow you to use the array whether or not you have batteries. So that's kind of nice. And load management is integrated within this system. Now, that's not to say you couldn't incorporate load management in all of these systems with a third-party product, but essentially what you're doing when you set up the Enphase is you set up a hierarchy of circuits, and then as it has power available or it loses the ability to service all of them, it just simply in reverse order starts turning off loads within your home. So you would set it up in a hierarchy as to which circuits have priority, and it'll just shut down automatically those circuits as you have decreasing amounts of power available. That's especially critical when you're operating just off of what the array is producing rather than batteries. So the reviews on this system, very positive, but it's a bit pricey and a little underpowered compared to some of the others. And then, of course, there's, yeah, Bob, you got a question?
Yeah, before we move on, on the Enphase, the sunlight backup is an option.
Right.
And it's about $1,800 for that option. So you don't have to have it.
Well, I think isn't the option though that you've got to put in your smart switch, you know,
Right.
Because you've got to be able to disconnect from the grid.
Exactly.
And that's where you're going to get the cost. So whether you're putting batteries in or not, you're going to have that. I mean, if you want backup, you're right. You can use these things just like a regular grid tied thing without that disconnect. But then, of course, you're not going to have power when the grid goes down. It's just going to shut off like any grid connected system. So
exactly. And but you get the advantage. The 8s are can handle larger panels.
Yeah, I think, what do you remember what the wattage is on the 8s? Is it like 300 and 320, maybe something like that?
I would say about that, yes.
It's in that neighborhood anyway. Might be 300, might be 340, somewhere in that range. Yeah, we're seeing a movement towards larger and larger panels all the time.
And what's interesting is that they bought up Green Tech as their major. They own Green Tech as a distributor, and try to get the 7s out of Green Tech. You can't. It's all 8s, no matter what you do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably you're going to be, depending on where you are, having trouble getting kind of any product recent, with all of the supply chain disruptions. So hopefully, anybody else have any comments on that so far as we wander through these? The SolarEdge, this particular, they're trying to sort of rebrand themselves here. Like any of these systems, whenever you have a battery backup, you're going to have some sort of inverter, obviously, that interacts with that battery. You're also going to have, they call them auto transformers, transfer switches, smart switches, some sort of component that's going to disconnect you from the grid and then redirect power to your critical loads. Well, SolarEdge, of course, this is a DC coupled system. So there isn't this process of going from the panel, which is DC, inverting it to AC, then taking it and reconverting it to DC to put into the battery. This is a DC coupled, so it comes straight from the panels to the inverter. Now you got to have your DC coupled inverter. You can't use just their standard SolarEdge inverter. It's a little bit pricier option. And I believe the auto transfer switch is within that inverter, if I'm not mistaken. It might be a separate unit, but I thought when looking at them before, but when I see these, it looks like there's a separate unit. So there's the battery, then there's the inverter, then there has to be some sort of smart switch, whether it's incorporated in the inverter or not. Then, of course, the advantage is, well, I'll give you some of the capacity numbers here. It's a DC coupled system, so slightly more efficient than the two other systems, which are both AC coupled. 9.7 kilowatt hours of capacity, so pretty standard. They're all hovering in there at around the 10 kilowatt hour capacity. And I did see a webinar where they were talking about some jurisdictions now are starting to limit residential homes to 20 kilowatt hour capacity for batteries. For whatever reason, they're just putting in this arbitrary thing saying anything bigger than that is dangerous or whatever. And we have touched on the fact that the NFPA, I believe the number is 855, which is the standard that has recently been adopted. And it is essentially making you put your batteries outside. The reason why that's going to start being enforced is it is being incorporated into the IFC, the International Fire Code, with the 2023 edition. So that's going to be sort of pulled in. And as part of that code, it says that within a residential home, you can't have the batteries inside unless you've created a dedicated space that meets all sorts of criteria for these batteries. So no longer can you just put them in your basement or whatever. They've got to be in a special room or outside in a garage or attached to the building, but it can't be within 3 feet of a door or window. They have to be less than 40 kilowatt hours. And as I said, some municipalities are reducing that even further. So we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out, because obviously more and more people putting batteries in, and now they're restricting where they can go. I'm not quite sure if that's a logical restriction or not. There is no curtailment here with the DC coupled. You know, if you don't need the power, it doesn't generate because it's coming straight in. It's a DC load coming in. You can use generators for charging. It does have a warranty similar to the Enphase warranty of 10,000 cycles, 10 years. So we're seeing these things, 10-year warranties on these batteries. And it does give you the capacity to hook up an electric vehicle directly to it. In fact, you can use these things to charge an electric vehicle even when you're off grid. Again, I don't know how efficient that is. You're taking a battery and charging another battery, but if it's an emergency, you know, that's a good thing to be able to do. Let's see this here. Let's see. Okay, Aaron is noted with the increase in use of drones. Has anyone seen or observed if these? I didn't read the rest of that. So I'll have to answer that offline. I can't actually on the small screen here, can't see that. This is just showing you the price points on the various systems. And to give a sense of it, this is price point installed. So we're not talking about the materials themselves. And it looks like on about average, and it's really hard to pin down these prices because it varies all over the place based on installer, based on part of the country. But the Tesla PowerWall, they were sort of saying about $11,500 installed, over and above what a typical grid-tied system would cost. Then give you a comparison on that, the SolarEdge coming in at about $14,000. So the Tesla is the low-cost option of these three, and then the Enphase about $15,000 tacked on. So just giving you a sense of the comparison. Some of the videos I've seen, they just sort of throw out this $15,000 number that if you want to add batteries to your residential system, it's going to cost you about an additional $15,000. Okay, so I think that's what I had there. Let me switch back over to gallery mode here. Yeah, okay, yeah, Bob, you've got a question?
Yeah, what about the Ford and Chevy PowerWalls?
Well, it's not
on 4 wheels.
Yeah. I think, of course, those are going to be an AC coupled system as well, because the inverters are on the vehicle themselves. And what we're seeing there is, you know, especially that Chevy one, the Silverado, with a 200 kilowatt hour capacity battery. I mean, I really think that's going to be a killer to these systems. I mean, if I were doing this, I'm not quite sure how they do the auto transformer on those, you know, how you disconnect from the grid. It would have to be built into the charging station in some way. So yeah, we're seeing about 17% of the installs incorporating batteries, but it might prove to be a little early. You know, I mean, we're going to have some better options here pretty quickly, at least I think, you know, with the Ford Lightning and I'm sure everybody else is going to jump on that bandwagon. But that's going to be a cheaper alternative for sure. One thing about that 855, the NFPA 855, they say you cannot park your car in your garage if you're using it for battery backup for more than 30 days. Now, it doesn't indicate whether that's at a time, whether you got to back it out and pull it back in again, sort of like parking on the street where there's a limit or whatever. But again, that seems like a weird regulation where you can only use your EV as electric battery backup on a temporary basis, which they have noted as 30 days or less. So that's all got to be sort of played out because, as I said, it's going into effect with the 2023 IFC, the International Fire Code, but not everybody adopts the IFC the year it comes out, so we may see in many jurisdictions a 4 or 5 or 6 year lag before these regulations begin to be enforced. Anybody else have any questions? I can actually see you all that now, so.
I was just wondering if the SolarEdge, you mentioned it had an EV charging option. Does that mean that, would that go both ways? Could it go both ways?
Yeah.
If your EV was set up for it, yeah.
Yeah, I remember looking at that before when they first announced it to see if it was bidirectional, and it was not. Now, whether they're modifying that in the newer versions, I don't want to say 100% that it's not, but at the time I did the research, and this has been 6-8 months ago, it was not bidirectional.
And maybe this is along the same lines, but if you had DC loads, and it seems like the SolarEdge would be set up better to power those if you wanted to. I don't know if anything's in the works on that stuff, but it seems like that might be coming down the line.
Yeah, you would think, considering all of the electronic devices, anything that has a battery incorporated is going to be a DC load. Although we're starting to see some of the efficiencies of inverters being so good that the standardization of AC is perhaps more appealing, even though you're going to lose 1 or 2% in the conversion. And it occurred to me, thinking back on the DC, on the charging station thing, I remember thinking when I looked at the SolarEdge thing, I didn't see a real advantage of that incorporating the charging station because it was only one directional. And now you got to locate your inverter near your charger, which didn't seem to make sense to me. It seemed like, why not, just make it another AC outlet somewhere. And, it seemed like kind of a solution in search of a problem,
And lastly, you mentioned the proprietary nature of the direction of the industry. I mean, do you think the SolarEdge, I've been told the Enphase you can't use with anything but the Enphase inverters.
Right.
But I don't know about SolarEdge and Tesla. They seem more universally adaptable to outside products.
Yes, well, SolarEdge for sure used to be, that was part of what they marketed, was you could use, they did a thing with LG Chem, but they did say they were compatible with other batteries. But I think as we get more into the load management issues and a lot of the communicating back and forth with the inverters, they're finding that having a single source, everything under the same name brand, is something that people look to for comfort, that they're going to work seamlessly with each other. And for the most part, we're only talking about like 3 different components, the inverter, the battery, and the transfer switch. So, whether they're all manufactured by the same company, they're all going to come to you under a single brand name, which makes sense as far as compatibility, as far as service. And there is a standard where they look at not only with batteries, not only that it's manufactured according to the standard for the battery, but it has to be manufactured in a way where it integrates in, and they look at it as a complete system. So one way of making sure that it meets that standard is if the same manufacturer is involved in all of the components. Anybody else have anything to add? Any comments or anything completely off topic? No? Okay, well, that's it for this week. All right, we'll see you guys next week. Take care.